Beautifully dramatic. The cruelest, savage exhibition of nature at her worst without, and we three. We elegant three within. I should like to think that an irate Jehovah was pointing those arrows of lightning directly at my head, the unbowed head of George Gordon Lord Byron, England's greatest sinner. But I cannot flatter myself to that extent. Possibly those thunders are for our dear Shelley, heaven's applause for England's greatest poet.
What of my Mary?
She is an angel.
You think so?
You hear? Come, Mary. Come and watch the storm.
What is it which characterizes the human spirit in its journey? Torn from a feeling of unconscious oneness, a primal sense of being together with all of nature, we are thrown into the world as a lonesome individual, and set reeling, rocked between the rioting waves of superstition and faith, reason and rigid dogma, death and fear, irrationality and feeling. The human heart, our pulsing bedrock, finds itself poised on the quaking ground between revolution and a terrifying urge to perfect this imperfection, to make still, to balance that lofty good luck peace, the dream of peace.
Hegel lived in a period in which many of his contemporaries reacted strongly against what they saw as the dangers or the excesses of the Enlightenment. One of the strongest reactions to this was Romanticism. Romanticism, a movement more or less born in Jena during the period Hegel was living there, carried out by some of his friends and by people he knew well, and something which both irritated him and which also quite clearly profoundly influenced him. This period in Jena was also the time during which Hegel was undergoing his rather rapid and astonishing philosophical development that culminated in what he always described as his voyage of discovery, the 1807 Phenomenology of Spirit. In that book, Hegel carried out his own famous critique of the Enlightenment, which included his scathing charge that the Enlightenment itself
is just as little enlightened about itself,
and that it misunderstood the arguments of what he called faith. This could easily make Hegel seem to be a romantic critic of the Enlightenment, somebody rejecting the apparent arrogance of all those French deists, Scottish skeptics, and materialists of all sorts in favor of some more emotionalist conception of human experience. Indeed, in a work often cited, this is exactly the conclusion that has been drawn, and it has appeared even in such popular publications as the English magazine, The Economist. On this view, Hegel's critique of the Enlightenment amounts to charging it with investing too much in reason and neglecting the emotional and religious side of experience, thus denying an essential part of human life. In short, that view sees Hegel's philosophy essentially as a species of the romantic rejection of enlightenment, bringing into play the familiar textbook oppositions of the mechanical versus the organic, disenchanted versus re-enchanted nature, and the like.
The most characteristic product of the Enlightenment is said to have been Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, an attempt at a printed compendium at all human knowledge available at the time. Diderot was one among a number of philosophers, who were the priests, soldiers, and propagandists of a new spirit of reason, tolerance, and progress. The Encyclopédie gave the definition of a philosophe as one who, trampling on prejudice, tradition, universal consent, authority, in a word, all that enslaves most minds, dares to think for himself, to go back and search for the clearest general principles, to admit nothing except on the testimony of his experience and his reason. The heart watches, while the brain burns. Josiah Royce passingly remarked a half-century ago that Hegel's phenomenology was akin to the contemporary Bildungsroman. That is, a coming-of-age story. We can be more precise and more circumstantial. By a remarkable feat of invention, Hegel composed the phenomenology as a Bildungsbiography, which is in a literal sense a spiritual history. It is, in other words, a biography of the general spirit, representing the consciousness of each man and every man, the course of whose life is a painfully progressive self-education, rendered in the plot form of a circuitous journey from an initial self-division and departure, through diverse reconciliations and ever-renewing estrangements, conflicts, reversals, and crises of spiritual death and rebirth. This plot turns out to be the unwitting quest of the spirit to redeem itself by repossessing its own lost and sundered self, in an ultimate recognition of its own identity whereby, as Hegel says in his concluding section, it can be at home with itself in its otherness. At home with itself in its otherness?
Come, Mary. Come and watch the storm.
You know how lightning alarms me. Shelley, darling, will you please light these candles for me?
Oh, Mary, darling.
Astonishing creature.
I, Lord Byron.
Frightened of thunder, fearful of the dark, and yet you have written a tale that sent my blood into icy creeps.
The Romantics, who felt such a frisson when the French Revolution began, who rebelled against the perceived cold rationality of the Enlightenment and sought to inject more feeling into the world, never referred to themselves as Romantics. This was a label provided afterwards by Victorian historicists. These writers referred to themselves with terms like sensuists and spoke often of the sublime and sublimity when speaking of their works.
Look at her, Shelley. Can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein? A monster created from cadavers out of rifled graves? Isn't it astonishing?
I don't know why you should think so. What do you expect? Such an audience needs something stronger than a pretty little love story. So why shouldn't I write of monsters?
No wonder Murray's refused to publish the book. He says his reading public would be too shocked.
It will be published, I think.